welcome everybody to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We are here to talk all things Missouri basketball Tigers. It is the NCAA Tournament time. It is March Madness. I am your host, Sam Snelling. If you're watching us on YouTube, you will probably see this box to my right, or to your right, and recognize that as not Matt Harris. This is Rocco Miller. He's a friend of the podcast and one of our favorite bracketologists, a guy we love to talk to about scheduling. All that kind of stuff has been great for us in the past. Rocco, how are you doing these days?
I'm doing good, man. Overall, it's an exciting time. Last week was pretty crazy. Had the WCC semifinals and finals in Vegas. Stuck around for another day and did the Big West. Touched base with the Mountain West. It's kind of ground zero annually for me because you can get around and see everybody from 3, 4, 5 leagues, and even if I don't make it to the arena, we all pretty much stay in the same hotels. So just walk around the lobby, run into different staffs. And it's like a little preview for what San Antonio will be like when we get there for the Final Four week. And they have their convention and see all the different programs out there. So it was good. And then I really had to dive in to the weeds when I got back on Thursday to get ready for yesterday's final forecast, and then reacting to the picks live with Jeff Goodman and Brad. And yeah, it was just it was a ride, but it's always like that. So
Yeah,
that's what we live for.
it is every college basketball fanatic's favorite time of year.
For sure.
And really, like, even if you're not as nutty about college basketball as maybe you and I are, like, this is still an exciting time of year for pretty much everybody. It's just excitement, ground zero. So the bracket has been released. The NCAA released a 68 team bracket. There was quite a few picks that were celebrated, some that were less so. So I want to start with like just some generic what did the committee get wrong here? Obviously, with the at-large bids, there's going to be a lot of teams that are maybe seeded really poorly, or at least in your opinion, you're the bracketologist, I am not. Or in a lot of cases, like a couple teams that maybe missed out on being selected, in favor of North Carolina. But yeah, so like, what are, like, when you were kind of watching things unfold, what were a few of the things that kind of jumped out as like, whoa, like that's not what I expected to see?
Well, yeah, great question. Appreciate you leaving it open-ended as well. I thought overall this year was an interesting year due to the fact that so many teams just inside the forecast that I produced at the end, and even throughout that last week or two, had vulnerabilities. There were reasons to leave them out of the field, more so than usual. Usually more of the bubble teams are like what I would consider San Diego State to be this year, which was they had a win over Houston. That's a 1 seed on a neutral court. They had a win over Creighton. They did enough in the Mountain West. They got 6 overall wins against the field. I thought San Diego State, because of their power numbers being in the 50s, like net, I think slipped to 52, stuff like that. There was a good chance they would end up in Dayton. So I had that. But I thought there was really no chance San Diego State would fall out of the field, and they didn't. But I'm using them as an easy example because most years those teams that get in, they have something that basically gives them that final stamp of approval to be in. But I could argue 7, 8, maybe 9 teams didn't have that, so it left a lot of wiggle room to maybe miss out on a couple teams, or put a couple teams in that probably didn't belong. And I think that's where we landed, unfortunately. So like West Virginia was in my first 4 to Dayton, and the committee had set the precedent, and I get it. Like, if I'm a West Virginia fan, I'd be pretty upset as well. Maybe not as drastically as they're going with it, but I would say this has been going on for a long time, ever since the Bonzie Colson saga with Notre Dame, however many years ago that was. And the committee almost put them in just because he was going to come back for the tournament, and they had a horrible resume. So if you look at West Virginia during that time, 13-10, they got a couple big wins. Obviously, their biggest win at Kansas happened without DeVries, but you would be able to eliminate that Gonzaga and Arizona neutral court win. They got blasted by Arizona in the league, same team without him. So I just thought, man, this is not good for West Virginia. There's plenty of reasons to leave them out. Also, with Indiana, only 2 wins over the field. If they didn't win at Michigan State, there's no way we're talking about Indiana.
Yeah.
So to put a team in just for one good day doesn't seem really necessary. They were the team. If UAB won for me, probably out. I was also tinkering with Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt had a 3:30 non-conference schedule. Now I love Mark Byington. I love that team. They're really fun to watch, but that's not what the process is. The process is about precedent and upholding that, and then having some sort of level of equity for all teams to be considered that have the credentials. And Vanderbilt, historically a team that close to the bubble, you could leave them out. And then you had Oklahoma, who only won 2 true road games all year. And of course, we know the conference record, that's not supposed to be considered. But it's like Oklahoma had 3 different seasons in one. But there were plenty of reasons to leave them out. You had Baylor, they had an effective record of 13-14, which is a bad season. They also don't have Big Josh. Big Josh has been out for 10 games. They're 4-6 with their only win, a home win over Baylor in overtime. You could have easily left Baylor out for the same reason you left West Virginia out. So anyway, that's the list. And then you have Carolina and Texas. Now, for me, Texas is by far the most egregious a team to be selected by far. I actually had North Carolina in before the Duke game, just knowing that Bubba Cunningham was the chairman. I talked about that almost every day for about 6 weeks. So that's not lost on me. I had my own Bubba governor built into my forecast to just, hey, if it's even close, Carolina's in. If it's close, Carolina's in. And as soon as Colorado State took that bid in the Mountain West, that was our only bid steal of the year. There was just simply no way you could put Carolina in, who only had 1 win against the field, over Indiana, who had 2, over Xavier, who had 3, and then the list goes on. So there was really just no room. Like if you did the process earnestly, there was no way to put Carolina in. So that was their problem. But there was definitely no way to put Texas in, a team that had 15 losses, had an effective record of 12-15. That's unprecedented. Nobody's ever gotten in that far under 500 when you take the quad 4 record out of it.
Yeah.
And the other part about Texas, sorry, just to finish my thought here, is they had there's only been 4 15-loss teams ever. This will be the 5th of all time. The other ones had something extraordinary, like the Colin Sexton Alabama team had wins over 1 seeds on the road. I think 2 of them. There was a Vanderbilt team that got in with 15 losses that also had amazing wins, 2 seeds, 1 seeds. This Texas team, not even close. Not even close, Sam. Like their best road win was Mississippi State, an 8-9 team. They had chances against all those teams at the top, lost against all of them. They picked up an A&M win in Nashville, and quite honestly, that's probably too late anyway. But even so, they're a 4 seed. So there was nothing extraordinary about Texas. I thought that the league, as much as good as it was, getting 14 bids is a slap in the face to the other 30 leagues in college basketball. And I know this is an SEC show, so I'm sorry, but it's very upsetting.
Well, so I'm happy to talk about that because as somebody who, I think a reasonable argument can be made for the 14 teams. And I think a reasonable argument can be made that if you're trying to do your best to include the best teams, that you should remove the league record as an indicator. I've always been a proponent of let's remove the league record to a degree. Like I do think that there needs to be some level of you need to be able to perform to a certain level against your own peers. And I don't think winning, 1 out of, 3 games constitutes that.
Right.
However, and I brought this up. So last week we were talking with Blake Lovell, and we're talking about the ACC.
Yeah.
And like the ACC, without a doubt, was a terrible league this year. And you look at, and I will give some credit to the committee for dinging, teams with gaudy records that they seeded, namely Louisville, who really didn't beat anybody in the non-conference. They lost to several, teams in the field. and they were competitive in some of those games, but they didn't really have any great wins, and yet like I think Pat Kelsey was on the radio, in Kentucky, like complaining about their seating, and it's like, well, like like you can talk about winning 19 of your last 20 games or whatever, but if you're beating Boston College, if you're beating these kinds of teams who just are 180 in Ken Palm, and like that's a completely different discussion versus what like the SEC is dealing with, which has been unquestionably a gauntlet. And I'm concerned for SEC teams after having going through what is essentially an NCAA tournament game every night. To like the only time you get a break is if you get South Carolina or LSU at home, and like that's just a really really rough time. And like meanwhile, like Clemson's finishing their last 4 games against teams that are sub 100 in Ken Palm. So, how do you balance that? And and I'll even just let you answer this question. Like how do you find as like if you were on the committee, how are you balancing a league that had, in the non-conference was so great, and then they get in the league and they beat each other up,
Yeah.
and then you have a league that performs like the ACC, and just really doesn't have anybody that outside of, did they get 4 teams? They just got 3, right? The ACC.
They got 4 with North Carolina. Yeah,
That's
they
right,
got
North
4 with
Carolina.
North Carolina.
I Yeah, I've got 3 in my head because that's how many I thought they were gonna get in. North Carolina did get in, so they did get 4 teams. But how do you sort of navigate, these 2 sort of truths, being that the SEC was that great? And so if you put, Texas, or if you put Oklahoma in the ACC, like how are those teams going to perform?
I think it's a fair argument. If you're the SEC rep in the room, which is obviously Greg Byrne, Alabama's athletic director, you're making a strong case for the historically strong league, and I agree with all of that. Right now, when it comes to at-large bids, these are independent entities at all costs. So by the rule of the law, and I think most of my life, the committee's done a fairly good job of doing it that way. I
Mhm.
know there's human nature that we all understand which league everybody's in, and the results are there to discuss. So it comes up what league you're in, but it's also, you need to do a little bit out of conference. You need to be able to win on the road. Some of those basic things. We've heard it from the chairman of every committee for the last 25, 35 years. And it just, by including Texas, for example, which is again to the stuff that they have is unprecedented. There's it's the 7th year of quad systems and nets, the 6th bracket, because we didn't get one in 2020. And we've just, there's some easy benchmarks like the simple exercise of removing quad 4 from the record. They don't have to play the bottom of quad 4 if they don't want to, but they paid top dollar to
Yep.
get Mississippi Valley, to get Arkansas Pine Bluff, to get New Orleans, to get Chicago State, to get Delaware State. I mean, this was not an accident. And they rested on the laurels that SEC alone will get them in. And that can work if you have a great SEC year. Obviously, if you're 500 or better in the league, you're almost for sure getting in. But
Missouri.
right, right. But Missouri had some nice, there was a little bit of non-conference in there. They beat Kansas. That mattered a lot.
Mhm.
And Texas lost 7 home games. I mean, I've never seen a team in my life get in with 7 home losses.
Yeah.
In any level of college basketball, and I get it. SEC's in their own level this season and probably for the future. You're matching your level of play. You got to be able to defend home court. We've all said that our whole like forever. And this team lost at home 7 times,
Yeah.
and went 4-7 if you take away the quad 4 for, home record. Their home record was 4-7,
Mhm.
and their best road win was Mississippi State. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that this team could even be in the discussion. And with all that said, I thought the other 13 teams that got bids, there was a case for them, and
Mhm.
a much better case. They had acceptable records, even the Oklahoma thing. So again, I'm using Oklahoma Texas comparison because they had the same conference record. Oklahoma went undefeated in non-league. They picked up Louisville, Michigan, Arizona, great wins, and another one. So Oklahoma stayed relevant. If there was ever a 6-12 that was going to get in, it was going to be because they had the wins to get there. But at a certain point, winning and losing has to matter.
Yeah.
And basically, what the committee told us yesterday that it doesn't. And I think that's a tragedy because
Yeah.
yeah, it has nothing to do with the ACC, the Big East, or any other conference. These are independent evaluations. And if I look at a team, and I'm sorry to pick on Texas, it's really nothing personal. I love Rodney Terry, we're friends, but 12 and 15, 12 and 15 in your only meaningful games is a bad season,
Yeah.
which is why he's on the hot seat. It's a
Yeah.
bad season.
Yeah, I mean, and realistically, like even the tournament berth is not likely to save his job if
There
Texas
you go.
decides to kind of do things. Like it wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you. Uh,
Hmm.
but it is one of those things. And as a guy who watched Missouri all year and watched their non-league schedule, uh, like it is one of the complaints that we came into this season with is like you you and Missouri every year is going to have Kansas and Illinois. They already had Memphis on there, so like there was,
Yeah,
but
that's
that
great.
was it. And when you're talking about kind of like building a resume, you're giving yourself 3 opportunities. They went 1 and 2 in those opportunities coming into league play. And then like if you don't get things kind of go your way, like even if Missouri was sitting at like 8 and 10 and you take away Alabama and Florida, like their resume was pretty soft
Yeah.
and they're probably looking at a lot more like like an 11 seed or something like that. I still think in like an 8 and 10 team in this SEC probably gets in, but your
Probably.
point is completely valid and I agree with it. And it is one of the things that like I would rather see us not reward teams like Texas, and I'm going to include North Carolina because I agree at some point you have to win those games.
Yeah.
And North Carolina's record in Quad One is just atrocious. If
Right.
if they even had like 1 or 2 more wins, I'd be like, okay, like I can kind of see it. Like the
Sure.
predictives are nice enough, but at some point you have to beat somebody.
Right.
And you're right. Like North Carolina didn't do it, Texas didn't do it. Oklahoma had the advantage of those really terrific wins in non-league play,
Hmm.
and then it's like they got just enough to sort of to get in. But even them, like they're a 9 seed, and that was impressive. I thought they were going to be more like a 10 or 11, and
Right.
for them to
Right.
get a 9 with a 6-12 league record is has to be unprecedented.
Yeah,
So
probably is. Probably is. I'll have to look that one up. I think the thing about Oklahoma that bugged me the most was just that 2-7 true road record. I
yeah,
get all those big wins were on neutral courts, but there's something about being able to go to another team's campus and get at least a few wins, like what Missouri did. Missouri only had the three, real true road wins, but they made them count. Florida, they're the only team to win at Florida that carried all the water for Missouri. Then you added Mississippi State, which by the way was Texas's best, and
mhm,
you added the Georgia game that I was at. So those at least those three mattered a lot. And
yeah,
you don't like the three. I think it was 3-8 overall. That didn't help Missouri, but at the same time, it didn't seem to hurt them because they got seeded 6th still. I think if they would have dropped a seed line or two, it would have been due to that. So other committees of the past would have probably penalized them. You had to put a good team as an 8 seed. The committee decided Gonzaga and Louisville were those two. I said Missouri and who was my other one? I can't even remember now. But Missouri was one of my 8s, mainly just because of that road record. Because to me, some of the principles of committees of the past have always been who did you play, where did you play, how did you do, and that's basically just saying did you get not only did you get big road wins, but what was your overall body of work away from your own arena.
yeah.
That used to be everything, and now they basically just sent a message yesterday that's completely almost the opposite.
Well, so let's talk about like what you liked about what the committee did as opposed to just what they didn't do well. Because I think it is always easier to kind of point out the
It
flaws in
is.
something.
It is.
We're kind of sitting from the spectator seats and lobbing
Sure.
bombs. But the bracket is the bracket, and they did make some interesting choices, and some of them I liked, and some of them I didn't like. Uh, I love the fact that, and this is in Missouri's western region. Like I love the fact that we're going to get John Calipari and Bill Self in a first round, and then the
Right.
winner gets Rick Pitino. Like
It's
these are like
crazy.
the little things and like always like pop up in the bracket, and you look at it, you're that's great. Like I can't wait to see how this plays out.
Yeah, yeah, and we did some reverse engineering on that, and there may or may not have been some some rearranging to make that possible. But you're right. Like some of those things are just perfect for the sport. It was no surprise about an hour later the TV schedule came out, and that game, of course, will be primetime CBS, as will Patino afterwards, because
Mhm.
they're in the same pod out there in Providence. But yeah, no, if the committee can make it work, and I think what we saw this year, I think the bigger story is where college sports is going. And what we've already been noticing with football becoming the power two almost, with that money and everything else spilling into our sport of men's college basketball and other sports. That process yesterday, whether it was the Kansas Arkansas matchup that they kind of artificially had to do,
Mhm.
and or the inclusion of North Carolina and Texas, so they could get both of those brands on the Tuesday and Wednesday of Dayton, just speaks volumes about where we're going, as a collective sport. If half these athletic departments are operating because they have a spending problem, or they're promising their players too much money, so things of that nature, you got to make your money back during this event.
Yeah.
So I think just from a larger business perspective, as economics, that was my study in school. That was my major. So I get it. I totally get it. I just wish they'd come out and say, "Hey, this is a business. We have to start doing things a little different."
Yeah.
And if Carolina's close, we're going to get them on in the play-in. And if we can find another brand that we like, or maybe it's like the SEC's threatening to leave the NCAA, or the Big Ten is, or they both are. If we give the SEC 14 bids, we feel like they'll be happy. I mean, they can't ever say stuff like that, but that's really the message I'm getting here.
Well, it's almost like anytime you turn into ESPN these days, they're talking about the Dallas Cowboys. It's like the same thing. It's like,
It's the same kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's what's gonna, attract the most viewers, and how do
Yep.
we keep those viewers engaged?
Yep.
Um, did they did they at least get like the top 8 seeds correct? Like
Yeah. I, I can live with what they did there. I guess my only surprise, well, I'll say this: for starting with the first 4 seeds, is almost spot on.
yeah,
I left Oregon in the top 4. That was the only one off, but they were just outside. They swapped with Purdue. I can live with that. I had Purdue out just because they had losing records in Quad One and on the road. But again, we found out later the committee wasn't as focused on the road as usual. That's usually a good tiebreaker, though, which I'll defend for my own forecasting. But outside of that, I totally agreed. I mean, I was almost exactly perfect on that part.
yeah.
And we knew going in that, from about the middle of the 4s all the way through the middle of the 8s until you got to like Creighton and UConn and those teams, it was going to be messy because it was really difficult to separate. And that's right in that mix that Missouri was in. So I could see where Missouri is a 6, which is what they got. But like I said, somebody had to be 29 and 30, which are 8 seeds. Missouri landed 29 for me. I don't have any regrets about it. It was mainly just due to the road record overall, win percentage wise. And I just knew there was a couple teams like Kansas and UCLA. They weren't going to put teams like that all the way down to an 8. So I just held them as bottom 7s. That's more of a business mindset. So I'm proud of myself for getting that part right.
Yeah.
But the ones I really missed on are my own teams here that I cover often, is the WCC. And they've usually seeded them pretty well. I thought they seeded them fairly, to be honest. I just guessed at it wrong. I thought they would each get 6 seeds, or maybe one of them get a 6, the other get a 7. But they went 7 and 8. St. Mary's, of course, had to be higher, winning 2 out of 3 and winning the big one at the Kennel. And in Gonzaga's specific case, they didn't get that road Kentucky win like they did last year. That basically rescued them from the bubble and went all the way up to a 5 seed, which was crazy to watch. But I just thought in general, like I spent time with Stu Jackson last week, the commissioner of the league, at the WCC tournament. He had to get out to the committee on Tuesday morning, so I spent time with him Monday night. It's his first year on the committee, so I don't think he had any idea what he was going to be facing here. And fortunately for him, he doesn't have to answer these questions this year. But if he's on for a few years, he's got to get some practice.
Yeah.
But he even said in his press conference, we fully expect St. Mary's Gonzaga to get favorable seeds, and he said it with distinction. I probably took that a little too seriously and kept them at sixes, so I missed there. But honestly, what they landed with, I have no problem with. Their resumes weren't sparkly, and they both had big non-conference opportunities. Gonzaga fell short against UCLA, UConn, and a bunch of others. So I'm totally good with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about Missouri's portion of the bracket here a little bit.
Yep.
I was quietly hopeful that they would get a 6, mainly because I was looking at the potential threes, and I thought that the potential threes were all softer threes. There's a lot of teams that I sort of felt that Missouri would be a favorable matchup. And, this is all contingent on the Tigers that we saw sort of in that middle stretch of the SEC
Yep.
season where they looked great. Um, Fans of this podcast will know that, like, we had them at one point playing like the second best team in the country from
Yep.
like middle of December to like middle of February. They were, I think, fifth in Bart Torvik's ranking site. So like they were just playing like a great basketball team. If
Yeah.
Missouri can find their way back to that, uh, then I was looking at the 3 seeds, and the 3 seeds were like, floating around. But so Iowa State's been banged up, um, and not had the season I think a lot of people sort of projected them to have. Wisconsin, uh, a team that plays up tempo, maybe not always great defensively. They're a little bit smaller. Kentucky, I thought was going to be a 3 or a 4. New Missouri probably wasn't going to get matched up against another SEC team. And then so Texas Tech, and Texas Tech is a team that, because they're not super big, I actually kind of thought that was a favorable matchup. I mean, as
Yeah.
far as like the Tigers' perspective, like you have to be feeling pretty good about how the bracket lays out for you.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think probably some people are spooked by Drake a little bit. Drake's been incredibly successful in their opportunities, but we still don't know. I would argue Missouri compared to Kansas State and Vanderbilt and Miami, of course. Miami, I think Drake started to break them during that tournament. But they do have those 3 power conference wins.
Mhm.
Missouri, much more athletic, much older. I mean, so much skill on Missouri with Bates and Grill's ability to just knock down shots and the sheer size of, it sounds like Mitchell will be available. That's great news for the Tigers.
Yeah.
And Gray's huge. I was up close with them down in Athens and played amazing that game in the second half. So yeah, I agree with you overall. Like there might just be too freaking athletic to for Drake to really be able to slow it down. All they want to do is slow it down and be very deliberate each possession. We'll see if Mizzou cracks or not. But if they do get to that Texas Tech matchup, I agree. Texas Tech games are kind of crazy. So are Mizzou games sometimes, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of just comes down to like who gets that late momentum and can close it out. But I really see that as almost a coin flip, and that's why that's kind of I think what you're looking for against a 3. You don't want to play an overwhelming 3 or 2 if you would have been seeded 7, right? So yeah, I see your logic there. I think there's a really good opportunity to get to the Sweet 16 within that. And if you do, you'll be out here with me because I'll be covering the West Regional in San Francisco wire to wire that week. So that'll be fun.
That's right, at the Chase Center.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You guys will love it
Yeah.
if you get here. Yep.
So so the Sweet 16 would then, are you thinking, like a lot of people seem to be, that like the Rick Pitino St. John's team is just a force to be reckoned with, and they're just going to steamroll their way to the Elite Eight? Or do you think that's even a matchup that Missouri can, possibly make some damage? Or do you think that like St. John's going to get clipped by, a Hall of Fame basketball coach in round 2?
It's possible. They're certainly not superior enough, especially in terms of skill, shooting the ball, etc., to just give them a hall pass to the Sweet 16. Hardly any teams are, to be honest. This is a brutal tournament. Everybody's good. Omaha's on fire. And I don't think Omaha has that great of a chance, but it could get interesting. The Summit League is the electric offensive league, so Sutton will probably make it interesting for a while. But assuming that's not a big deal and they get to the second round, Kansas. You guys know Kansas better than anybody. This has not been your typical Kansas team. They've had moments where they just look done, especially that night at BYU. But they also recovered with a nice Arizona win, then kind of flamed out at the Big 12 tournament. Not sure how much weight to put on that performance. But I just think Kansas game to game is kind of shaky. And St. John's is built to break you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could be a bad matchup for Kansas in that scenario. At the same time, Kansas got arguably more overall talent, and if they're clicking and hungry and play that underdog card, maybe we all get surprised there. If it's Arkansas, Arkansas has really kind of figured some things out down the stretch. Obviously, their rotations are much more cohesive than before. They were a broken team back in January, and
Well, Cal's talking about bringing back Boogie Flan too, which
yeah,
sort of like,
I don't know about that. Yeah, yeah,
like maybe don't mess with what's working.
exactly. So we'll see. But I just think the inconsistency, right? Even when Arkansas fought their way back into the tournament picture, they were still winning like every other game. It's not like they've gotten to this role of dominance. They basically got in by winning at Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
So without that road win, well, now that Texas is in, I guess all that's out the window. But in my eyes, they got in with that Kentucky road win, because I still would have taken them over Texas even if they lost that game. But my point is they've just been inconsistent. St. John's has just been on such a steamroll, and they play. And I don't know how much you've seen them, but they play with unbelievable energy, like just nonstop, 40 minutes. Just they're probably the best conditioned team fitness wise I've seen anywhere all year. And it doesn't matter if they miss some shots, because eventually they're just going to out hustle you for everything, whether it's a rebound, a loose ball, all effort and energy. You can't beat them in effort and energy, and that just wins so many basketball games. Then this morning, Sam, I was reminded of the inflated Wilson ball that caused a lot of problems the last few years. They're using them again. I actually think that could be. I think that could be really good for St. John's, because the complaint about Wilson balls is you can't shoot it as well. It bounces too much, and I think St. John's loves that. They'll be all about the Wilson ball.
Well, that's an interesting point that I hadn't really considered. So hopefully, hopefully you don't need the rim as much, if you're at least if you're a Missouri fan.
Just bulldoze people. That's what the Wilson ball teaches us.
So before we get you out of here,
Sure.
I do want to sort of find out what's your final four picks, and who do you think is going to take the whole thing home?
It's a good question. I think I guess I'll just go with my original gut pick bracket without any research, just because we're so early in the process. Wednesday night, once the play-ins are over, I'll fill out about 10 of them and do a bunch of combinations just to try to keep a couple of those alive to be
Yeah,
in the mix by the final four. That's my strategy. It's an optimization play. But my original, I ended up with, surprisingly to me, but I ended up with Michigan State, Texas Tech, Duke, and Illinois, with Duke beating Texas Tech for the title. I don't love it,
wow,
but yeah, it was just literally going matchup by matchup.
yeah,
And I probably won't pick that again, but I have that as my original. So for the purposes of this show, I'll go with that. And I just think Duke in general, if they're full strength, assuming Cooper can play and Brown's
yeah,
fine, they're just at a level, and the numbers show it. They're just at a level that is a tad bit higher than what Florida. If Florida's dangerous too, by the way, but Houston as well. Houston trying to beat people up, and what Auburn's looked a little bit more mortal this month, even though
yeah.
the resume is insane. But they definitely look more beatable than any other time this season. So if you're going to go with the top, I guess Duke's the pick, but I'm hopeful. I'm in this for the upsets, just like I love the mid majors, Sam. So I hope that's completely off and we get some surprises.
Yeah, I, if you asked me a week ago, I probably would have said Houston.
Right.
I was really liking the way that they're playing, knowing that um, what's his name? Just lost his name. Their big guy.
Ian Shefflin.
No, that's Clemson. I'm
Oh,
talking about Houston.
oh, I'm sorry, Juwan Roberts. I'm sorry.
Roberts, that's it, Roberts.
I
I
was
had
staring at
Juwan in my
Clemson's
head.
page.
Yeah. But yeah, Juwan Roberts is a guy who apparently the ankle injury isn't that bad, but anytime you have somebody get dinged up right before Missouri with
Yeah,
Mark Mitchell, you're obviously going to be concerned. But like a week ago, I probably would have taken them. I don't know, man. Florida's playing really, really well.
yeah,
I really did like outside of the 10-0 spurt when Missouri was playing against them in the quarterfinals, the SEC tournament. I thought Missouri played really well in that game,
dang.
and it just did not matter.
Didn't
They
matter,
kept
yeah.
they kept chipping and chipping and chipping, and Florida be like, all right, like 2-3 plays, and now we're back up to a 10-point lead.
Yeah, they can do
Um,
that. It's crazy. The
yeah,
front line is so deep and the guards are all Splash Brothers. It's super dangerous with that team. I think with the Houston side of things, I mean, I love that program. They're going to break through eventually. I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure if it's this year or when, but they've had so many great teams fall short. Getting Gonzaga in the second round, most likely, that's interesting because I had Gonzaga for 3 of their last 4. They're definitely playing their best ball of the year right now.
mhm.
And yeah, that's 2 top 10 net teams in the second round. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah, I do like the fact that Houston is actually shooting the ball
Yeah, me
reasonably well
too.
this year, like
Mhm.
with Uzon and Cryer and those guys. I just think that's the thing that's kind of been missing on some of their past teams, and now it seems that they've got it. Maybe it's not entirely fixed, but certainly I think this podcast at least is hoping for a good showing for the SEC. So I'm hoping that Missouri can make a run just to kind of keep things interesting around here. Rocco, we're going to let you get out of here. I know that you're on a time crunch, so you can get a breather before your next podcast hit. But yeah, if you just want to give one more plug before we let you get out of here, and then we'll cut the tie.
I appreciate it, Sam. It's always good to chat with you and the whole staff there. At bracketshere.org is the website that will have non-conference schedule updates for 2026 by next month. So it's going to be your one-stop shop to track, especially the power conferences as they set the tone in scheduling. And then guys like me try to figure out who the mid-majors are actually going to be able to play.
Yeah.
We love that on Blue Sky and X/Twitter at Rocco Miller 8 for all sorts of stuff going on with my world. I will be covering the West Regional wire to wire once it gets down to the Sweet 16, starting with the practices and interviews a week from Wednesday, and very much hopeful that I can see all the great Mizzou people out here if you're able to get through this weekend. And then outside of that, this weekend we have a couple of people helping out with bracketcheer.org. Photographs from Raleigh, which should be pretty cool. Do some we're going to do a video log and a photo journal from Raleigh, and then live coverage from Providence as well. So excited about that. A little bit of a new wrinkle this year. Got a couple helpers coming in and getting some experience. So I think it's going to be a great month. We love it. And before we know it, we're going to be in the off season. So just enjoy every day that we have left.
Well, thanks for coming on, and then we'll try to have you back on. I like talking to you before the season once we kind of know the non-cons, so we can make fun of what Dennis Gates decided to do, and and we'll have to make that an annual thing. But it's always good to talk to you, Rocco. Thanks for making the time, bud.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. We'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.